Alright, hello, and welcome to a breaking news edition of videos for the lead up to the VCE economics exam, which is in 9 days' time on Friday, the 4th of November, from just before midday until 2 o'clock. We're going to be talking about today's new data that's come out about the inflation rate rising to 7.3%, and we're also going to be talking about the budget summary that came out last night from the new Labor government. A very, very important thing about this video is that it's information that you can 100% use or ignore. You do not need this information, but if it makes sense to you and you think it will make you sound smart on the exam, you are more than welcome to use it to the best of your ability. So let's get straight into it and not waste any time. So we've got the inflation rate. So annual inflation rate for the period ending September 2022 has risen to 7.3%. This is up from 6.1% in the last quarter. So that's a significant increase when our goal range is 2 to 3% on average over time. Obviously, that is well beyond the goal range, therefore meaning that the goal of low inflation is technically not being achieved. If you also look in this graph, which goes through decades of inflationary data, inflation hasn't been this high since the late 80s. That's when I was born. I'm 33. This has been a long time since we've had inflation this serious, which shows that household discretionary income will be going down because people's expenses are so much higher, so there's less spending money left over, which is going to have a lot of ripple effects into the economy, whether it be through lower levels of production in the future, potentially high rates of unemployment in the future. These are some of the effects that it's going to be having. Obviously, at the same time, inflation is going to have a much greater impact on lower income households compared to higher income households. This also means that technically none of the other domestic macroeconomic goals are being achieved, because our goal of strong and sustainable economic growth states that it's the highest growth rate possible without any unnecessary inflationary, external, or inflationary pressures. So in that case, 7.3% inflation is unacceptable inflationary pressure, and that means that that goal is technically not being achieved when the strong and sustainable economic growth rate, the goal is 3 to 3.5%, and we are currently at 3.6% anyway. So you could argue that that is not being achieved. Then with full employment, it's the lowest unemployment rate possible without causing any unacceptable inflationary or external pressures. Currently, unemployment is at 3.5%. The goal for full employment, the lowest unemployment rate possible, is kind of vague. We usually say around 4.5% is NAIRU, which is the non-accelerating inflationary rate of unemployment. Obviously, inflation is accelerating. Therefore, we're probably not achieving that. So full employment is likely not to be achieved either. It's going to make some evaluate or discuss questions very, very interesting on the exam, because there's a lot of scope to talk about why none of the goals are being achieved and the potential negative impacts that may have on the future in the economy. And finally, last night, our new Labor government put out their budget in October for the ongoing financial year. Their budget is a $36.9 billion budget deficit, which could be seen as less expansionary than the Liberal budget, which was announced earlier in the year, which is around an $80 billion deficit. They call this a $42 billion improvement, but the improvement depends who you are and what you do as to whether it is an improvement or not. Financially, it is better for the country, but there's a lot to look at in terms of what it actually means. Some of the positives about the budget. So an important thing with this budget, you do not need to use any of these policies in your exam. You can use any policy from the last two Liberal budgets and access the full marks. The main reason I'm offering these to you is that if any of these make a lot of sense to you, you are free to use them in any of your answers. So with this, they've offered cheaper childcare to 1.26 million families. Obviously, that is good for aggregate supply. It's going to get the labour force participation higher and therefore potentially increase our productive capacity. Paid parental leave up to 26 weeks by 2026. That will be very interesting in that it could actually decrease the labour force, as people will be more willing to leave the labour force to have children for a while. So that'll be interesting to see the impacts of that. Permanent migration and skilled migration increased to 195,000 in 2022-23, so really aggregate supply focused. A $2.4 billion investment in the NBN, That can be both aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Obviously, in aggregate demand, it's an injection by government spending of 2.4 billion, which should increase aggregate demand. For aggregate supply, this is NBN in regional areas, which should increase our efficiency and our productive capacity. And finally, and what I think is the best or most interesting policy from this budget, is 480,000 fee-free TAFE places. So fee-free being they have no cost for students in areas of skill shortages. So in many areas where we currently are struggling and facing productive bottlenecks, as of next year, there's going to be free places for students in those areas to study without any kind of cost, and then they'll be able to get into careers in that area, which that works into aggregate supply in terms of being an education and training policy, which is obviously going to have an impact on our efficiency and our productive capacity, and therefore increasing aggregate supply. So there's been a whole bunch of recent information from the last 24 hours about the economy in the lead up to your exam in 9 days time. If you have any questions at all, feel free to hit me up at sean@therunningeconomy.com or comment below. If you got to the end of this, I'm impressed. You're clearly wanting to know about any random thing that you could potentially use in the exam. If you didn't get to the end of this, well, you're not listening right now, so I don't really care. But yeah, if you have any questions, comments, any ideas, anything you want to know more about, let me know and I will not hesitate to help you out unless I'm sleeping. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you next time. Goodbye.